The most terrifying sound in the ancient world was not the roar of a lion or the crash of thunder. It was the methodical, heavy thud of a city guard's fist against your door after sundown. Thud, thud, thud. Each strike echoed through the small, dimly lit house built into the great wall of Jericho. Rahab froze, a clay cup halfway to her lips. The cheap wine inside trembled. Her eyes, wide in the flickering lamplight, darted across the room to where the two men crouched in shadow, hidden under a pile of freshly harvested flax stalks drying on her flat roof. Their own eyes were like those of hunted animals, all whites and fierce, silent intensity. Thud, thud, thud. Hinged. Rahab, daughter of... The voice from outside was gruff, impatient, laced with the authority of men who carried weapons. Open in the name of the king. Every citizen of Jericho knew what this meant. The king's guards didn't make social calls at this hour. This was an accusation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that seemed loud enough to betray her from across the room. She was a woman who knew men, their desires, their boasts, their weaknesses. She could navigate a drunkard's fury or a lonely man's sorrow. But this was different. This was the cold, impersonal machinery of a city-state gripped by panic. And it was at her door for weeks. A low-grade dread had been seeping through Jericho's formidable double walls, thicker than any winter fog. It started as rumors from traders, whispers in the marketplace that curdled into terrified certainty. The Israelites. The stories were biblical. A people led by a desert god who drowned the army of Egypt in a sea he peeled back like a curtain. A god who fed them bread from the sky and made water gush from rocks. For 40 years they had been a spectral threat on the edge of the wilderness. Now they were camped on the eastern banks of the Jordan River, a vast, silent multitude. And their new leader, Joshua, was no gentle shepherd. He was a veteran commander who had seen the earth swallow rebels whole. Jericho was a fortress city, a jewel of Canaanite power. Its walls were legendary, so thick that houses like Rahab's were built into them. The people felt secure behind their stone and mortar. But security had evaporated. The king had sealed the gates. No one went in or out. The city wasn't just preparing for a siege. It was holding its breath, waiting for the nightmare to descend from the hills. And now the king's guards were at her door. They knew. Somehow, they knew about the two foreign men who had slipped into the city at dusk, whose accents were wrong, whose cloaks smelled of desert wind and campfires, not the stale, closed-in air of a besieged city. They had come to her house. Of course they had. Her house was the one place where strange men coming and going raised no eyebrows. It was its own kind of gate in the wall, a gate of shame and transaction. She was Rahab, the prostitute. Her home was a boundary stone between respectability and ruin. And now, it had become the most dangerous house in Jericho. She looked at the spies, for she knew now that's what they were. Their faces were etched with a desperate trust. They had gambled their lives, and the secret of their entire nation, on the character of a Canaanite prostitute. They had nowhere to run. The city was locked. The guards were outside. They were utterly at her mercy. In that suspended moment, with the pounding echoing in her skull, Rahab made a calculation that would rewrite her destiny, alter the course of a military campaign, and ultimately, change the story of the world. It wasn't a calculation of profit or even of survival. It was a calculation of faith. She had heard the stories of the God of Israel, and in her spirit, she had already come to a shocking conclusion. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. The guards outside represented the crumbling power of Canaan, the old order of fear and gods made of stone. The two men trembling under the flax represented the terrifying, life-giving power of the living God. She had to choose her side. She set the cup down, the wine still sloshing. She smoothed her simple tunic and walked to the door, her mind racing faster than her heart. She would lie. She would deceive the king's own guards. She would risk immediate execution for treason to protect these enemies of her city. Her hand touched the heavy wooden bar. This was the point of no return. With one act, she would sever her ties to Jericho forever. She would become a traitor to save her own soul. She drew a deep, shaking breath, arranged her face into a mask of annoyed cooperation, and lifted the bar. The door swung open. The glare of a guard's torch flooded the threshold, casting Rahab's elongated shadow back into the room. Two soldiers, their bronze helmets glinting, filled the doorway. Their expressions weren't curious. They were accusatory. "Where are they?" the lead guard barked, not bothering with a greeting. "The men who came to you tonight. They are Israelite spies. The king demands their heads." The guards outside represented the crumbling power of Canaan, the old order of fear and gods made of stone. The two men trembling under the flax represented the terrifying, life-giving power of the living God. She had to choose her side. She set the cup down, the wine still sloshing. She smoothed her simple tunic and walked to the door, her mind racing faster than her heart. She would lie. She would deceive the king's own guards. She would risk immediate execution for treason to protect these enemies of her city. Her hand touched the heavy wooden bar. This was the point of no return. With one act, she would sever her ties to Jericho forever. She would become a traitor to save her own soul. She drew a deep, shaking breath, arranged her face into a mask of annoyed cooperation, and lifted the bar. The door swung open. The glare of a guard's torch flooded the threshold, casting Rahab's elongated shadow back into the room. Two soldiers, their bronze helmets glinting, filled the doorway. Their expressions weren't curious. They were accusatory. "Where are they?" the lead guard barked, not bothering with a greeting. "The men who came to you tonight. They are Israelite spies. The king demands their heads." She closed the door, her hands trembling now that the performance was over. She barred it again, leaning her forehead against the rough wood. Then she turned and hurried to the ladder leading to her flat roof. The two spies emerged from the flax, dust and stalks clinging to their clothes. The fear in their eyes was now mixed with awe. This woman, a pagan, a social outcast, had just outmaneuvered the entire military apparatus of Jericho for them. They didn't speak. They waited. Rahab faced them, and what she said next was not the cunning speech of a survivor, but the profound confession of a convert. It was a theological treatise delivered from the lips of a prostitute in a city under judgment. "I know that the Lord has given you this land," she began, her voice low but fierce. "A great terror of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Let that confession sink in. In the heart of enemy territory, from a woman who worshipped Canaanite gods by profession, came a clearer, more accurate declaration of Yahweh's sovereignty than many Israelites could muster after 40 years of miracles. She didn't just fear the Israelite army. She recognized their God as the supreme universal ruler. Her faith was born not from blessing, but from hearing of his holy terror. And from that holy terror, she sought holy mercy. "Now then," she said, the business of salvation becoming practical, "please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father." The men did not hesitate. "Our lives for your lives," one of them said, a solemn oath. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." But how? When the attack came, it would be a maelstrom of shouting men, collapsing stone, and divine judgment. How would the Israelite soldiers, in the heat of conquest, know which house to spare? They needed a marker, a signal clear enough to see through dust and battle smoke. Rahab's house was her life. It was built into the city wall, its windows looking out over the countryside. It was also her vulnerability. The solution was literally at hand. "Lower us down by a rope from this window," the spies instructed, pointing to the opening that looked out outside the main city wall. "Since your house is built into the wall, we can escape directly into the night. Then, gather your entire family here. Your father, your mother, your brothers, all your relatives. Bring them into this house. Do not let them step into the street when the attack comes." Then they gave the instruction for the sign. "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. A scarlet cord. Tikvath chut hashani." The word tikva means cord, but it also means hope. This was a cord of hope, a blood-red line against the sun-baked mud brick. It was a sign of covenant, reminiscent of the lamb's blood on the doorposts in Egypt that marked households for salvation during the final plague. Her house would be a Passover house in the midst of Jericho. And, the spy continued, his voice grave, "You must bring your family into the house. Anyone who is in the house with you will be saved. But anyone who leaves your house and goes out into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will be free of the oath. And if you tell of our mission, we will be free from the oath you made us swear." The terms were absolute. Salvation was communal but conditional. It required gathering, staying inside, and unwavering secrecy. The cord was the sign, but obedience was the requirement. "Let it be as you say," Rahab agreed. She fetched a long, strong rope, dyed a deep, unmistakable crimson. Perhaps the very cord she used to let clients or supplies up to her secluded room. The color of scandal would become the color of salvation. She secured it to a sturdy beam. The two men climbed through the window, gripped the rope, and in the dead of night, with the king's guards chasing phantoms toward the Jordan, they slid down the great wall of Jericho and vanished into the darkness of the foothills. Rahab pulled the rope back up, but she did not put it away. She took that scarlet cord and, as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, she tied it prominently in the same window. It hung there, a bold, illogical banner of hope on the impregnable wall of a condemned city. Every neighbor who saw it would wonder. Every passerby might scoff. It was a public declaration of her private faith, a silent scream of allegiance to a God she had never seen but now believed in with all her heart. She then had 3 days. 3 days before the spies could return to Joshua across the Jordan. 3 days to convince her entire family that her house was the only safe place in Jericho, that the gods of stone and bronze were powerless, and that their only hope was the scarlet cord in the window of the town prostitute. Imagine those conversations. The disbelief, the shame, the fear. But Rahab, the woman whose word had just diverted the king's guard, would have spoken with a new, unshakable authority. Faith had made her a prophet to her own household. For Rahab and her family, the next 7 days were an eternity of nerve-shredding tension. They were trapped in a city of terrified people, going through the motions of life while waiting for an apocalypse they had secretly aligned themselves against. The scarlet cord hung in the window, a daily reminder of a promise from the enemy. Meanwhile, on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, the spies returned to Joshua at the Israelite camp in Shittim. They gave their report, their words tumbling out. "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." And they told him of the woman, Rahab, and the oath they had sworn. Joshua listened. This was not just military intelligence. It was a divine confirmation. The fear of God had gone before them, just as he promised. And in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, he had prepared a heart for himself. The covenant with Rahab was honored by Joshua as a sacred, binding oath before God. The Israelite nation broke camp. They journeyed to the banks of the Jordan, at flood stage, a raging, uncrossable barrier. Joshua commanded the priests to take up the Ark of the Covenant, the very throne of the god Rahab confessed, and step into the raging waters. As their feet touched the river's edge, the water upstream piled up in a heap, and the flow downstream cut off completely. The entire nation crossed over on dry ground, just as their parents had at the Red Sea. This was a deliberate, terrifying echo for any Canaanite watching from the walls. Their God was repeating his greatest hits. The men of Jericho, including perhaps Rahab's brothers, watching from the parapets, felt their last shred of courage evaporate. The stories were true. This was not a normal army. This was the judgment of a deity they had no power to oppose. Once across, Joshua commanded a radical, holy ritual. All the men were circumcised, consecrating the new generation for war. They celebrated the Passover, remembering the blood that saved them in Egypt, a poignant parallel to the scarlet cord now hanging in Jericho. And the manna, the supernatural bread from heaven, stopped. The season of wilderness survival was over. The season of conquest, of taking the promised land by faith and force had begun. Then Joshua had a visitor. A man appeared before him with a drawn sword. Joshua challenged him, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The answer redefined the coming battle. "Neither. I have come as commander of the army of the Lord." This was not Israel's fight. This was the Lord's battle. Israel was merely the instrument of his judgment on the deeply entrenched evil of the Canaanite nations. Jericho was the firstfruits of that judgment, devoted wholly to destruction, harem, except for one house, the house marked by a cord of scarlet, the house that held a heart of faith. The instructions God gave Joshua for taking the city were absurd from a military standpoint. No siege towers, no battering rams, no tunnels. For 6 days, the entire army was to march silently once around the city walls, led by 7 priests blowing trumpets of ram's horns before the Arkansas. On the 7th day they were to march 7 times, and then, at the blast of the trumpets, the people were to give a mighty shout. Imagine Rahab's family, huddled inside her house, hearing this unfold. Day 1. The muffled sound of countless feet tramping the dust in a slow, solemn circle around their city. No war cries, just the eerie, haunting blast of ram's horns. The walls shook with the vibration. The people of Jericho peered over the battlements, confused and terrified. What kind of warfare was this? Day 2. The same silent march. The same horns. The tension inside the city became a living thing. Inside Rahab's house, faith was being tested against the soundtrack of impending doom. Did they look at the scarlet cord and feel hope, or feel like fools? Day 3, 4, 5, 6. The ritual became a torture. The Israelites were not attacking. They were enclosing, applying spiritual pressure. They were demonstrating that Jericho was utterly surrounded, not just by soldiers, but by the presence of God himself. For Rahab, each circuit was a confirmation. Her God was doing exactly what he said he would. The walls that seemed so permanent were being condemned with every silent step. If you're on the edge of your seat, feeling the tension of that week inside the walls, then this format is working. For more stories that put you right in the heart of the biblical drama, make sure you're subscribed. Now for the climax. Chapter 5. The shout, the fall, and the gathering. The 7th day dawned. A different energy crackled in the Israelite camp. Today was the day. Joshua got up early, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The army marched, once around the city, silent, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. The people of Jericho must have been numb with dread and confusion. Then the 7th circuit. As they completed the final lap, Joshua gave the command. Shout! For the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. He reminded them of the one exception. But spare Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house, because she hid the spies we sent. The moment arrived. The priests blew a long, shuddering blast on the trumpets. Joshua commanded the people, Shout! For the Lord has given you the city. and 2 million voices rose in a unified, earth-shattering roar of faith and declaration. It was not a battle cry before the victory. It was a shout of faith because the victory was already assured. They shouted, not at the walls, but to the Lord. And in that moment, the physics of judgment intersected with the promise of mercy. Deep in the foundations of Jericho, a shockwave of divine power erupted. The massive, double walls, the source of the city's pride and Rahab's literal foundation, began to shudder. Stone grated against stone. A low rumble built into a cataclysmic roar. The ground itself seemed to drop away. The great wall of Jericho did not simply crack or breach, collapsed. It fell flat, stone pouring inward and outward in a catastrophic avalanche of dust and rubble. Every section fell, except one. Where Rahab's house was built into the wall, the structure held. As the wall to the left and right of her crumbled into heaps, her little house remained standing, a solitary tooth in a shattered jawbone. The scarlet cord in the window fluttered in the dust-choked air. The promise held. The covenant was honored. In the midst of total devouring judgment, there was a pocket of miraculous, engineered salvation. The Israelite army surged over the flattened ruins. The battle was not a fight. It was a mopping-up operation. As commanded, they devoted everything in the city to destruction. Men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep and donkeys. The silver, gold, bronze, and iron were carried into the Lord's treasury. But Joshua had given direct orders concerning 2 spies and 1 house. The 2 men who had sworn the oath fought their way through the chaos, through the dust and noise, seeking a landmark that was no longer a wall but a lone, standing structure. They found it. The house stood. The scarlet cord was there. They entered. There inside was Rahab, and with her were her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. Everyone she had gathered according to the word. They were terrified but alive, unharmed. The spies took them and brought them out. They brought Rahab and her whole family out of the smoldering ruins of Jericho and placed them outside the camp of Israel. This was not a rejection, but a ritual purification. They were Gentiles from a devoted city. They needed a period of transition, but they were alive. They were saved. And the narrator of Joshua makes the stunning, simple declaration. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. She lives among the Israelites to this day. This is the ultimate seal on her story. The outcast was brought in. The traitor to Jericho became a citizen of Israel. The prostitute became a daughter of the covenant. Her past was not erased, but it was redeemed. Her name, Rahab, would forever be connected to her former life, Rahab the prostitute. Not to shame her, but to glorify the staggering depth of the grace that found her. Rahab's integration into Israel was not a footnote. It was a masterpiece of grace. She didn't just survive. She was grafted in. The law of Moses had specific provisions for foreigners who wished to join the covenant community. They were to be treated with love, for the Israelites themselves were once foreigners in Egypt. Rahab, by her confessed faith and her protecting of the spies, had already performed the ultimate act of solidarity. She had chosen their God and their people. We can imagine the process. The period outside the camp would end. She and her family would undergo ritual cleansing. They would learn the laws and customs. They would hear the stories of the patriarchs from the very people who were their descendants. And Rahab would hear, perhaps with a stunned heart, the story of another unlikely ancestor. A man named Abraham, called out of a pagan land because he believed God. Her story was becoming a new iteration of his. Then, something even more extraordinary happened. We read it in the genealogy of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Matthew. The line goes, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab married. She married a man named Salmon. Who was Salmon? Jewish tradition holds he was one of the 2 spies she saved. The text doesn't confirm it, but the poetic symmetry is powerful. The men whose lives she saved at the wall would forever be part of her legacy. Salmon was a prince of the tribe of Judah. The former Canaanite prostitute married into the royal, messianic tribe. She became a mother. Her son was Boaz. If that name rings a bell, it should. Boaz is the hero of the Book of Ruth, the wealthy, godly landowner who shows hinged, covenant loyalty to a destitute Moabite widow named Ruth. Where did Boaz learn such radical, boundary-crossing kindness and faithfulness? Perhaps at the knee of his mother, Rahab, who knew what it was to be a foreign woman shown unimaginable mercy. Boaz married Ruth. They had a son named Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David. Do you see the line? Rahab, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. The woman saved from the walls of Jericho became the great-great-grandmother of King David, the man after God's own heart. And from the line of David, centuries later, would come a promised Messiah. Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, is named in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. She is one of only 5 women mentioned in Matthew's genealogy, a hall of fame that includes Tamar, who posed as a prostitute, Ruth, the Moabite, Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, an adulteress, and Mary. God's family tree is gloriously, scandalously full of redeemed outsiders. Her scarlet cord, a sign of protection, finds its ultimate meaning in the blood of Christ, a protection from a judgment far greater than the fall of a city. Her story is a prelude to the gospel itself. That faith, not pedigree or moral perfection, is the instrument of salvation. That no one is beyond the reach of a seeking God. That God specializes in taking what is broken, despised, and written off, and placing it in the central narrative of his redemptive plan. So what does this ancient story shout to us across 3,500 years? 1. God's grace precedes our faith. Rahab didn't clean up her life to merit salvation. She heard reports of God's power, and the Spirit stirred fate. In her heart, while she was still in a condemned city, in a condemned profession, God was already at work, melting hearts with fear to create an opportunity for faith. Your moment of turning to him is always a response to his prior pursuit of you. 2. True faith always leads to action and risk. Rahab's faith wasn't a private feeling. It was public, costly, and dangerous. She lied to authorities, hid enemies, hung a sign of treason in her window, and bet her family's lives on a promise from foreign spies. James, in the New Testament, uses Rahab as his prime example. Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? Faith that doesn't change your actions isn't faith. It's agreement. 3. Salvation is personal but not private. Rahab's first thought after securing her own safety was for her family. The covenant included them. Our faith has a gravitational pull meant to draw others into safety. The scarlet cord was for everyone in the house. We are called to be gatherers, to bring those we love under the protection of the promise we have found. 4. Your past does not disqualify your future. The Bible never whitewashes Rahab's story. She is always Rahab the prostitute. God doesn't erase our history. He redeems it and uses it as a testimony to his power. Your greatest points of shame and brokenness can become the very platforms for his greatest grace in your life. The scarlet of your past can become the scarlet cord of your testimony. 5. God honors covenant faithfulness. Joshua and the entire nation honored the oath made by 2 spies. God is a covenant-keeping God, and he expects his people to be the same. The story stands as a monument. When you make a promise in his name, keep it, and you can trust that his promises to you are unbreakable. There is always a way out. For everyone else in Jericho, the walls were a tomb. For Rahab, the wall became her escape route. 7. You are never too far from the family of God. A Canaanite prostitute in a city devoted to destruction ended up in the direct lineage of the King of Kings. If God can do that with Rahab, there is no one he cannot reach, no life he cannot rewrite, no story he cannot redeem for his glory. Your background is not a barrier to God. It is a candidate for his grace. The story of Rahab is the story of the gospel in the Old Testament. It is a story that whispers and then shouts that no wall is too high, no past is too dark, and no person is too far gone for the reach of a redeeming God. All it requires is the courage to hang your hope, like a scarlet cord in the window, and to believe the promise that comes with it. I will save you and all who are with you.